Right, it's a Alfa Romeo. Not sure what they call them. I've heard them called juniors, but I think that's a smaller engine one. This is a 2 litre, an old workshop manual. This is 2 litre GT Veloce, or 2 litre Spider Veloce. So it's not a Spider, that's the smaller one, so it's got to be that one. Alfa Romeo 2 litre GT Veloce, 71 to 75, and that's 70. L reg is 72, 73.
Okay.
June 72 to June 73, I think. Nice car. It's an older restoration, but they made a nice job of it. It's all up together. He believes it's South African, which I'm not sure about because it's left-hand drive, and most South African cars are right-hand drive.
Okay.
Could have gone over there as a left hooker, who knows. He's been working on the brakes, can't get them quite finished, and he couldn't change the front disc for some reason, so we've got 2 new front discs. Changed the master cylinder, whether they're old, I don't know if they're old flexis or new. We've got new discs to put on, yeah?
Yeah.
That's the old master cylinder in there. There are 2 front wheel bearing kits there, and a brake servo repair kit. So it might be the brake servo, but in theory you can't get any pedal on the brakes, but it shouldn't matter whether you've got a servo attached or not.
Right.
You bleed your brakes and then the servo makes the pedal easier to push when the car is running.
Okay.
Doesn't stop you bleeding the brakes as such, unless the brake fluid is pissing out the new master cylinder into the servo, which being a new master cylinder you would say it's not.
Okay.
Handbrake needs adjustment. I think they're on this model. You've got an outer disc with a drum brake in the middle of it, I think. I'm not 100% sure. But till I get it up on a ramp and go through it, we don't know. Runs, starts, drives. It's got quite a list of parts, but he wants to get the brakes done first to keep the costing down. So we'll do that first. I mean, it doesn't take long to change wheel bearings and bits and pieces, you know. And then see if we can bleed it through. There's a specific way in the manual of bleeding them, which is very unusual. What you do is you normally bench bleed your master cylinders before you put them in. Now on one of these, it says in the manual I've got to take your left hand side front and rear wheel off and bleed them at the same time.
Okay.
And then once they're bled through, take your front and rear wheel off the other side and then bleed that side through, which is quite an unusual way of doing things. Normally you go from your furthest wheel away and work to your closest wheel, to the master cylinder. But hey, that's what it says in the book. That's what it says in the book, isn't it? All we can do is try it. I think possibly on some of them they have a pressure regulator canister to, under hard braking, they'll put more brakes to the front of the car than the back to stop the back locking up.
Okay.
So it could be something iffy in there, I don't know, because I think he tried to pressure bleed it, which if they've got regulators and modulators in them and things, you don't want to do that because it can blow valves and all sorts of things. But all we do is give it a try and see what goes. If we need to get a new one, we'll get a new one.
So what is brake bleeding? Is that just when you take
basically say it's a sealed hydraulic system. Yeah, so you got, let me show you. So that's your master cylinder.
Yeah.
Or this piece under here these are your reservoirs. That's your brake servo. All brake servo is vacuum from the engine, yeah, makes the pedal easier to push.
Yeah.
So as I was saying, that should be totally irrelevant to the situation of bleeding the brakes.
Yeah.
That'll come into play once the brakes are bled, then you can see if the pedal's easier to push when the car's running or not.
Yeah.
Okay? So this is what we call a dual or double or dual braking system. So there's a picture of the lines in here. So that's the bit we've just been looking at. Okay, 2 reservoirs on your brake master. You push your pedal, goes in there, forces fluid, that's your servo. So the one nearest the dashboard goes to the back brakes, yeah? Yeah?
Yeah.
And the one nearest the front goes to your front brakes. So if one of these runs out or something happens in there, you've still got either front or rear brakes.
Yeah.
You'll still have some braking, yeah? So bleeding it, you imagine that when you assemble it all, yeah? It's full of air.
Yeah.
So you need a sealed hydraulic system. So what you do is, in the master cylinders, there's a little tiny hole, a bleed back hole, they call it. So you press your pedal down, yeah, and that forces fluid through the pipes.
Yeah.
So you have a bleed nipple on each corner. Okay, so generally, like I said, you only open one, and it forces whatever air is in that line out of that bleed nipple. So you put rubber pipe on your bleed nipple.
Yeah.
That goes down into a reservoir, and it will blow. Every time you press that pedal down, it will blow air out. Keep doing it, it will blow air out. And when all the air is expelled, you have clear fluid coming through when you press it.
So you're actually bleeding air, not fluid?
You're bleeding air out of the system, yeah. So then once you've got all of your air out of that one, you normally lock it off. You normally start furthest away. So you do, on a normal bleeding, the way of bleeding something, you start there, there, and then there.
Okay.
It's just you're trying to get rid of expel the most amount of air on its longest run to get rid of it. But in theory, you've only got one pipe going to the back, and then it splits. So half the time, when you get on a dual circuit braking system like this, you'll bleed that one, and then go to that one, and hardly any air at all will come out of it, because it's already done the long run down.
Yeah.
But on this one, as per the manual, it says take that wheel off and that wheel off and bleed them at the same time.
Okay.
And then do the other side, which I've never ever heard of, but hey, that's what workshop manuals are for, isn't it?
That's it.
So yeah, that's the basic principle of it. All you're doing is moving fluid backwards and forwards. When there's air in it, the pedal does that, and nothing happens on the brake end.
I see. So it's like at home when you bleed your radiators, you're bleeding air
Out of it. So you think of a hydraulic motion, it's forcing that amount of fluid in that pipe. However far that pedal moves, it's all on ratios, but however far that pedal moves, that should close your brakes accordingly, like that. Yeah. So on drum brake cars, if you haven't adjusted your shoes up properly, and you've got a massive gap between the shoe and the drum, when you press that, it's doing that, but it's taking up all that time before the brakes work, which is why you have to adjust all your drums.
It's like a liquid vacuum then.
Liquid pressure.
Yeah.
But on disc brakes, they should, unless they're really sticky, the calipers, they should squeeze the brake disc and then just come off by, you're talking tiny amounts, just to let it run, and then they don't self-adjust. You can, on some systems, when you're doing the brakes, I've done it before when things won't bleed through, just crack it open and leave it, just open a little tiny bit overnight, and it'll self-bleed itself through. Yeah, just to get any air out of the system, things like that. The only other thing that could be wrong with it is on your pedal, if it's holding that internal rod. Oh, so that's the old master, yeah. Now if that is being held just slightly in, that much probably, it won't bleed. You have to have free play between the pedal and that point there.
Okay.
So I haven't looked on it, it might have an adjuster in there. If that is just ever so slightly in, it's covering your air bleed hole.
Yeah.
You won't bleed it. It doesn't matter what you do, you have to have free play there.
Okay.
So that's something to check. Yeah, if there's no free play on the end of that rod, being as that's got a hole in it, yeah, that's got a taper in the end of it. So I would say you brake off your pedal, you have a rod with a pivot this end that goes into there.
Yeah.
Okay, now if that's holding that, any form of open at all, it probably won't bleed. So that's the one major thing to check.
Okay.
Because the piston isn't coming back, because you've got two pistons in there. One does that one does that one. They work in conjunction. Some are spring loaded, some are pressure loaded, so that it'll put more pressure on the front brakes than the back. Don't think these are, I think it's just two pistons. But got the old one, so I can take it apart and have a look and see what's going on. But being as he hasn't been able to bleed it at all, I've got a feeling possibly there is an adjustment on that and it's holding that open.
Yeah.
But until I get it up in the air and check it all out, I don't know. But like I say, restored probably, I think you said about 10 years ago. It's all in nice condition. Like I say, you've got a list of other parts, but we need to get the brakes done first. So.